Hello there, aquatic adventurers. Welcome back to Musicland Stories, the origin point for all music and adventure stories in the known universe, and some of the unknown ones. And we're here at the Musicland Concert Hall. I'm your trusted narrator, the Captain. Me and my crew of musical mariners have been out here on an oceanic odyssey in search of the fabled last Leviathan, hoping to capture the sound of its lonely lament to store in our musical archives. Along the way, we found a different mythical creature, a sweet-natured selkie called Sailboy. He got a bit turned around at the sound of some deep-sea drilling, and we've been helping him find his way home, a mysterious island called Hy-Brasil that only appears through the fog once every 100 years or so. Which is to say, if he misses the boat, he'll be waiting around for a long, long time. But don't worry, Hy-Brasil has a special way of resonating, and according to my sonar, we were closer than ever. Margie, our resident drummer and the eldest of our adolescent crew, she was keeping me company as I steered our slightly chartreuse submarine towards its destination. By which I mean, she was standing behind me in the cockpit, anxiously tapping her drumsticks on the ship's metal console. "Do you mind?" I asked. I didn't mean to be snippy, It's hard to pick the proper pings in the sonar when there's polyrhythms popping in your ear. "Right, sorry," Margie said. She took a step back and proceeded to pat out a pattern on her thighs instead, which was a little better. More muted anyway, but still distracting. Before I could say anything else, she asked a crucial question. "How do we know we're headed in the right direction?" "That's what the sonar is for," I explained, trying very hard to hold my patience. "Right, but listen." Margie tapped her fingers rhythmically on the back of my chair. "Nothing's changing," she continued. "The reverb is resonating back and around itself. Normally, this sound swells and fades as we get further away. But now, the transients are all just not very transient, I guess." I put up a finger, asking for silence. This time, Margie actually obliged. She was right. The sonar was too steady. The engine was purring, but the ship was stuck in the pitch-black waves. "When was the last time you cleaned that window?" Margie asked. Technically, her twin brother Mingus was supposed to clean them last week. That's what it said on the chore chart anyway. So I looked to the porthole she was pointing at. Sure enough, there were thick, slimy trails sliding down the glass. These weren't leftover streaks that Mingus had missed. The goo was still fresh. Then Margie pointed straight ahead as two gangly brown stalks rose up in front of the cockpit window, revealing the peering eyeballs of a gargantuan sea snail. And judging by the way it was looking at us, it was very, very hungry. Land snails usually feed on decaying matter. That's why you always find them crawling in the garden. But underwater tritons are known to be particularly vicious, if slow-moving, predators. And somehow, we had steered ourselves right into the path of a particularly ravenous and extremely large gastropod. Before Margie and I had a chance to react, we heard a blood-curdling scream from below the deck, where the rest of the crew had been practicing their instruments. We rushed down the stairs as quickly as we could. The source of the sound was Sailboy himself, who seemed to have some familiarity with the sea snail's serrated tongue-like tentacle thing, which was now trying to slice its way into the ship. Gastropods are so weird. The other kids all looked at me, screaming, "Do something! Do something!" But what did they want me to do? I hadn't exactly prepared for the possibility we'd be turned into a meal for a monstrous mollusk. So I turned the question back around on the others. Omar suggested using salt like he used to pour on slugs as a kid. Which, first, don't do that, okay? And second, we were in the ocean. There was already plenty of salt in the water. I think he also wanted to steal its shell to play like a trumpet. Ezra asked if he could feed it something else, but didn't say what, and then got strangely quiet when I offered up his old accordion as a snack. Sealboy arfed some sort of suggestion that no one understood, except for Mingus, who barked back at him, then fell into a fit of laughter. Those two had a very special bond. And then there was Kaylee, who was so overwhelmed by all the other ideas that she couldn't even see straight. To be fair, I had also noticed that incessant tapping sound in the background, which reminded me of Margie, of course. Except she wasn't in the room. I followed the sound of her impulsive drumming and realized it was coming from outside the ship. I looked out the window and there she was in the dark ocean depths, using her drumsticks as hooks to scale along the side of the ship. Remember, kids, it's always important to stop and take a moment to think before you act. Unless you're about to be eaten by a giant sea snail, then I think it's fair to throw out all the rules. And that's exactly what Margie did. She was the oldest member of the crew, after all. Exactly one dotted half note older than her twin brother, in fact. The others tended to look up to her leadership, sometimes even more than mine. So she grabbed a scuba suit and got to work. We watched through the window as Margie used her drumsticks to jab the sea snail's radula. That's the weird toothed tongue thing it was using to get inside the ship. She poked and prodded and parried the appendage like John Bonham acting out an epic sword fight from a song. Or maybe like Patty Chamel on a Tuesday. Margie had backbone, that much was clear. But that wasn't the only advantage she had over the insatiable invertebrate. She also had multiple limbs, which meant she could do more than one thing at a time. Whether that's hammering out 16th notes on the hi-hat while tapping out the 2s and the 4s on the snare, or deflecting the sea snail's terrible tendril while prying it off the side of our ship. Soon enough, Margie had peeled off all its squishy teeth and gave the radula quite a kick to push the snail away from us. We thought her song was almost done, but oh, there's always time for a drum solo. Margie jabbed a drumstick right into the radula, which flailed in pain. She used the momentum to whip herself through the water, an extra hoist up onto the creature's back. We watched in awe as she worked her way up the whirl and then began to pound out a polyrhythmic blitz on the back of its shell. Margie slammed her sticks so hard it made the water pulse around them. So you can imagine how loud it must have sounded inside that shell, with each percussive punch echoing along the deep ocean waves. Each successive thwack sent the sea snail reeling until it finally writhed its way off our submarine. But Margie was still on its shell, and its wing-like foot muscle couldn't quite reach far enough to pull her off. So the sea snail bucked like a stallion at a rodeo until it finally flung Margie off its back way out somewhere in the darkened waters, far beyond anything the light had ever seen. We tried to find her, but we could only see so far out in front of the ship. By the time the sea snail swam away and we were able to look around the ocean depths in earnest, there was no sign of Margie. Not even a drumstick. Meanwhile, We still had to get Seal Boy back home before his island disappeared again. We were too close now to let that happen. So I set a course for Hy-Brasil and let the ship's autopilot follow its mystical frequency through the waves. The rest of the ride was sadly silent. It wasn't just the absence of Margie's incessant, anxious finger tapping. It was that other awful truth that we were all too scared to speak, for fear it might be true. Whenever it seemed like someone might break that silence, someone else reminded them. Margie was resilient. She could find a way if she found the right rhythm. Besides, she had a full oxygen tank. But we were trying not to get our hopes up. Eventually, the sonar let out its loudest ping. We gathered in the cockpit to watch as our ship reached the surface. We emerged into a grayish haze, but the glittering fog soon parted ways, showing us the sunlight for the first time in months. And straight ahead, the sandy beaches and lush green hills of Hy-Brasil, like something out of a dream. There was a song on the wind that sounded like one of my portals. Which is not to say the Hy-Brazilians were ripping off my song. There are only so many chords out there to use after all. But it did make me think, maybe there's something more to the magic here. There was no time to dwell on that though. Seal Boy was too busy arfing in excitement. This time, it was easy to understand his meaning. He was happy to be home. His family, all half-seal folk just like him, came bounding over the horizon as we reached the shore, running as fast as their furry fins could carry them. Seal Boy swam ahead to greet them. Tears of joy gushed from their blubbery eyes as the family reunited. It was a bittersweet moment, parting with another friend. But at least Seal Boy was happy now. His parents invited us to stay for the night and enjoy a homemade Hy-Brazilian meal. And, well, even in our dour moods, we weren't about to turn down a once-in-a-century sulky supper, were we? I can't even remember what kind of magical meal they fed us. Because right as we walked up to the banquet table, we saw Margie there, waiting for us. Her twin brother Mingus pushed through the crowd and gave her the biggest hug that he could muster. The rest of us piled on shortly after. Over dinner, she explained what had happened. The sea snail had thrown her so far that she washed ashore, right there on Hy-Brasil, just like the legend said. She used the sign language she'd learned from her brother to chat with the Selkies, and told them how she'd seen their missing sibling, how our crew was on the way to bring him home before the island disappeared again. There was something else too. Margie told me in private, as the rest of the group gorged on their mystical dessert. She didn't want to distract from the Selkie celebration, you see. But while she was underwater, Margie heard the last Leviathan. And now, she knew where it was going. Of course, it's one thing to know where you're headed, but the journey to get there, that's another thing entirely. That's a song for another day, though. Come back next week, and I'll tell you all about it. For now, this is your captain, out. Musicland Stories is a collaboration between Starglow Media and Double Elvis. Executive producers from Double Elvis are Jake Brennan and Brady Sattler. Executive producers from Starglow Media are Jed Baker and Agarenish A. Palmer. This episode of Musicland Stories was written by Tom Dunn. Alessandro Santoro is our showrunner. Narration by me, Nikki Lynette. Original score by Scott Janovitz. Story editing by Zeph Lundy. And episode mix by Colin Fleming. Grown-ups, you can find more ad-free audio fun for the whole family by subscribing to Starglow Plus on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts.